Hello and welcome. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Deadly Broadcast by Kate Parker. This is story 8 in the Deadly series. Here's the blurb. The phony war has dragged out past Christmas into a dark and dreary New Year, 1940. In the blackout, someone murdered BBC engineer Frank Kennedy, making him more popular dead than alive. A blackmailer and bully, he sold out his friends, assaulted his broadcasting house colleagues, and sabotaged his employer. Kennedy was also a government informant against the IRA. Despite arrests of members, the IRA is still planning more attacks against British civilians. Attacks Frank Kennedy might have been involved in. Britain's counterintelligence spymaster orders a newspaper reporter, Olivia Redmond, to find Kennedy's killer and learn which of the many motives led to his murder. Olivia quickly learns how vicious Frank Kennedy was and halfway hopes his killer escapes hanging until his killer strikes again. A clean read, no blatant sex, violence, or bad language. Some reviews. I thoroughly enjoyed this latest mystery to be solved by Livy Redmond. I particularly like the addition of real-life people, Edward R Murrow and his wife Janet, who assists Livy in answering some of the mystery's puzzles. Setting key elements of the story at the BBC London broadcast studios gives readers a sense of Murrow's radio presence as well as the inner workings of the radio world. The war is getting closer, which mostly keeps Livy's husband Adam away, making their time together special. The murderer was not a total surprise at the end, and even Livy had a couple of false steps. It had some nice red herrings. It's a deadly favorite. The mystery has good characters that move the plot along with very relatable characters. I enjoyed the aspect of featuring a well-known broadcaster and his wife from the World War II era. The protagonist was smart and energetic. She allowed the reader to follow her adventures with ease. Highly recommended. I think one of the best parts in this book is the blackout. It's one thing to live in the countryside and experience total darkness. They're semi-used to the things being dark. But imagine London in total darkness. People are still out and about. The danger of robbery, assault, and even murder is greater. I'd be hiding in my flat. Parker captures the emotions of Londoners living in the blackout. It's so exciting, yet so creepy. It's bad enough when the power goes out here for an hour or two. Deadly Broadcast plot is well paced, and it will keep you flipping or swiping the pages. I love the interactions between Olivia and her government boss. The clues that Olivia finds will help you figure out who done it. There are plenty of suspects, so pay close attention. If you're a fan of historical, cozy mystery books, especially those set in the World War II era, you'll love Deadly Broadcast. The strong characters, well-paced plot, blackout, and mystery makes Deadly Broadcast a must-read for cozy mystery lovers. Here is my review. An enjoyable read full of intrigue and threats, with the plot as dense as London smog in the early days of the war. The phony war, when most bombs in London were IRA bombs. The IRA issue is interesting. The IRA, the blue shirts, somewhat akin to America's silver shirts, don't forget, Nazis were marching up and down Broadway in 1938, seeing Germany as an ally in their guerrilla war against Britain. A lot of shirts about in those days, black shirts, brown shirts, blue shirts, silver shirts, and in Romania the green shirts, let alone crazy Roderick Spode and his black shorts. Right? Weight is given to the plot with the role of Ed Murrow and the workings of CBS and the inner workings of the BBC, the recording studios, the stars, the actors, and the technicians, along with British intelligence snooping about in the shadows. and our journalist investigator Olivia Redmond trying to shed light on a murder only yards from Broadcasting House, the BBC. Remember Orwell's Room 101. Why is Ed Murrow important? We have to understand that the USA was anti-British and had no qualms at all about Nazi Germany. In 1938, Henry Ford was in Cologne receiving the Great Eagle of Germany Award for the building of his new factories, having just sacked half his workforce in Chicago. IBM were in Germany during the late 30s and early 40s. How did IBM make their money? By doing censuses. And why would the Germans want a company doing a census? Coca-Cola was selling its Nazi Fanta drink in Germany owing to some brand embarrassment and a shortage of ingredients. Standard Oil did greater business with Germany throughout the war, as did Ford and General Motors. Another thing to keep in mind was America's ambassador to Britain, Joseph Kennedy, who was vocally pro-German and vocally anti-British. Luckily for Britain, Roosevelt managed to stop Kennedy running for office. As for Ed Murrow, he was able to show the American public a picture of Britain unknown to them, a land of ordinary and stoic working-class people struggling to survive, not a land of just royals and snobbish elites. His role in this detective thriller is very much a part of the blackouts and the smog, food shortages, an array of suspects, an unsolved murder from the past, constant back and forth with questions and changing answers, with sudden moments of danger, cloaked by a backdrop of impending horror that makes this a good read. As for Deadly Broadcast, the question I ask myself is, would I read another in Kate Parker's Deadly series? Yes, for me, and hopefully for you, a much-loved genre in a fascinating chapter of our island story. I didn't realize your husband transmitted from BBC headquarters. I was taking more notes, fleshing out my article. Oh yes, CBS doesn't have its own studios here. Why so late? Is it the only time they can get to the studio? No, she told me. New York is 5 hours behind us. Ed wants to get on the air at least close to the prime listening evening hours. 1 a.m. is ideal. That's 8 o'clock in New York and 5 in California. But tonight they've given him an earlier time frame. Thank goodness. I'm not used to being up until 2 in the morning, I admitted with a laugh. I left that behind along with my college days. With this blackout, I don't feel secure walking along the street at any time after dark, even in a quiet part of town such as this one, Janet said. You can barely see automobiles, so anyone lurking in the shadows is invisible. At least it's not far from here to Broadcasting House, I said, sounding braver than I felt. This is a perfect location for a flat with your husband working just over there, and we'll have to walk quickly since it's too cold to linger outside. We bundled up against the chilly air and went downstairs to make the short walk to BBC headquarters. With the blackout, I couldn't see the greenery and the decorations still up along the streets on this Boxing Day, but I knew they were there. Normally, shop and flat windows would shine with dazzling lights during this season, but not this year, not during a war. Even with a full moon, I could see very little with a wispy fog swirling around. Fog, a blackout, and a lack of children's excited voices made this one Christmas season I could do without. Only an American, I decided, would have suggested holding an interview on Boxing Day night during a blackout with cold and fog worthy of an Agatha Christie tale. Maybe being so far from home made this holiday darker and colder for her than it was for me, and she wanted someone to talk to. I needed to shake off my gloomy mood. Once we turned from residential Hallam Street with its blocks of flats onto Cavendish and then the bustle of Portland Place, I could smell chestnuts roasting on curbside grills. Smells, at least, made their way through the blackout. I couldn't see people until they were quite near me, but that familiar roasted scent reached me and made my stomach growl. I turned my head to apologize to Janet for my embarrassing internal noises when I tripped over something on the pavement. I stumbled a couple of steps, but once I regained my balance, I turned to see what I tripped over. I couldn't see a thing, and not the pavement or anything blocking it. That section of the pavement was blanketed in deep shadow. "Are you all right?" Janet asked, standing closer to the curb than I was. "Fine, but there's a hazard here that should be moved. I'm glad it wasn't a brazier, so I didn't get burned." Embarrassment always made me sound stuffy or annoyed. I walked back, dragging my right foot, which was on the building side of the pavement. I quickly hit the object. I couldn't make it out in the darkness, the blackout to prevent German bombers from finding London being particularly effective on a cloudy, foggy night, despite the full moon. The blackout was equally effective on the ground, too, since it kept Londoners from seeing anything. I bent down and shoved at the object. When it didn't move, I began to feel around gingerly, not certain what disgusting thing I would find. It was a shoe, and a foot was inside it, and the foot was attached to a leg. I breathed in hard from shock. "We need to hurry, Livy, or we'd be late," came from behind me. It took me a moment to make my brain think of a response and another to get my mouth to work. "You go ahead, Janet. I need to find a bobby." Something in my tone must have warned her this wasn't an ordinary hazard. "What have you found?" She moved closer to me, peering over my shoulder. "Someone injured or dead." Squatting by the building, I didn't have a good view down the road. "Do you see a bobby on Portland Place?" Janet jumped a few steps away from me before she calmed down enough to try to get a good view up and down the busy thoroughfare. Headlights, even though partially covered, shone enough light on the pavement to illuminate the reflective parts of a bobby's uniform. "Yes, I think so. Yoo-hoo!" she shouted, waving her arms. It was effective. She gained everyone's attention, not just the bobbies. Then she stepped towards me and noticed, and said, "I don't know how you summon the police in England. I've never had to do it before, not even in America." "You managed it perfectly, thank you," I told her, noticing a few passers-by coming closer for a look, as if they could see anything in the dense darkness around the building. The bobby joined us in a moment, shining his torch around in front of where Janet and I stood. The torchlight illuminated an angle between two buildings where they met, creating a sort of alcove where dustbins were kept and dry leaves and old newspapers collected. In this alcove, a man sat slumped over slightly, his overcoat twisted around his body and his fedora pressed between his head and the wall. He looked as if he'd been facing the street when he fell backward and landed in the position we found him. I thought possibly he had knocked himself out, but the light from the torch shining on him, he looked pale, cold, dead. The bobby felt for a pulse, but I could tell he had no luck. He straightened and blew long blasts on his whistle. Janet, her hands over her ears, looked where the torchlight shone on the man's face. In her quiet American accent, she said, "Good heavens, it's Frank Kennedy." Holding his torch with one hand, the constable bent over and moved the man's coat with the other to reveal a knife handle protruding from the man's chest. Blood spilled down his beige sweater. I shuddered and stepped away for a shiver. His blood didn't look as if it had completely dried. He couldn't have been dead for long. With a shudder, I realized that meant there was a killer lurking nearby in the darkness. This is an excerpt from Chapter 5, when Livy Redmond is really getting stuck into the investigation. Even with the darkness of the blackout, I could clearly see Gerald Fitzroy return my glare in the dim light of shaded automobile lights. I wasn't one of his victims. There were 2 female, 1 male. Mind you, those are the only ones I noticed. And of course there were several other women who would have killed him for the pleasure of never having his paws grabbing at them again. Names? I'll let you figure it out. It's not difficult. Great. He seemed to enjoy not being helpful. What did his fiancée think of all this? Not much. That may be why she was his ex-fiancée by the time of his death. When I kept watching him, waiting for more information, he sighed and added, Mimi Randall is one of the actresses in the radio plays. That's where they met. When do they rehearse the radio plays? He rolled his eyes. Do I have to do all your work for you? The plays are rehearsed Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday evenings, while the chamber music concerts are rehearsed on Monday and Thursday afternoons. So both groups would have been at Broadcasting House Tuesday evening when Kennedy was killed, I said aloud. The chamber music orchestra will be giving a live performance and the radio players will be rehearsing. I wished I hadn't said anything when I saw Fitzroy smile. Now you're catching on. And here I am. I wish you luck. The rounded top of the Royal Albert Hall cut into the lighter shade of the sky. Fitzroy ducked into the entrance of the hall and I walked away. I needed to get back to Broadcasting House to find out the times and locations that this week's play and concert rehearsals would take place. It wasn't any great distance, but the blackout slowed everything down. When I arrived, blinking in the bright light of the lobby, I asked the guard at the main desk where I might find a list of rehearsal times and locations. She directed me to the artist's foyer of the lobby, where I found a large board with that day's rehearsals listed and all the information I needed. The BBC players would begin rehearsals at 6. Being on my own meant I could get a later dinner and stay around now to speak to people before the rehearsals began. I went back to the lobby, signed in for rehearsal room 6C by the bored-looking guard, and took the lift up. I popped my head through the doorway to take a look and heard, "What do you think you're doing?" "Looking for Mimi," I answered. I came back out into the hall to find I'd been challenged by a man in his late 30s or early 40s, healthy looking, but safe from conscription so far due to his age. He had dark hair, rumpled clothes, and a permanently worried expression. "She won't be here until near 6 on the dot. Who are you?" "Olivia Redmond." "Who are you?" "Keith Bates, director of this sinking ship." "Why sinking?" "With actors, the ship is always sinking. They can get more dramatic mileage out of those scenes, and they don't have to be played on the stage." I smiled at what I thought was an exaggeration, and he grinned in return. "I take it you're not an actor?" he asked. "I'm supposed to find out who killed Frank Kennedy. So far, I get the impression the killer will get a medal and a standing ovation." "Ah, you knew Kennedy?" "Never met him. However, he seems to have been universally disliked." I gave Bates a smile, hoping he'd think me harmless to talk to. "I tried a few times to get him ejected from our rehearsals. The powers that be told him to leave if he didn't have any reason to be here, but they never enforced the rules. Being challenged just made him more obnoxious." "Who did he annoy the most?" "Clarissa Northfield, our ingenue. She's very talented. She's also young, shy, and soft-spoken when she's not on stage." He put his hands where they didn't belong and made her cry. "We tried to get her to report him, but she wouldn't. And when I tried to report him, I was told it didn't involve me. I'm the director. How could it not involve me?" "Who was angriest with Kennedy? Obviously not Clarissa." "Paul White, a versatile young actor. He wouldn't ordinarily stand a chance of still being here with all these call-ups. However, he gets around on crutches from having had polio as a child." "I imagine Kennedy gave White a hard time, even without mixing up Clarissa in this." I was getting a good idea of just how awful Frank Kennedy could be. Called him Crip, made fun of him, and when Paul tried to defend Clarissa, Kennedy told him to stand aside and let a man show Clarissa how it's done. 2 possible killers, but none for blackmail that I could see. Bates smiled. Paul got his revenge when Kennedy tripped over one of his crutches and landed on the floor. 2 of the other actors and I had to hold Kennedy back to keep him from hitting Paul. When was this? 2 weeks ago, more or less. Recently enough that Kennedy might have started a fight with either Clarissa or Paul in front of Broadcasting House and been stabbed by one or the other in self-defense. But then why not report the attack? What time did you finish rehearsing last night? Bates frowned as he thought. 10:15, 10:20. Giving anyone involved a chance to meet Kennedy, leaving the building and kill him. The actors began to arrive in the studio. Paul White was easy to pick out, and I guess Clarissa Northfield was the delicate-looking young blonde. A few older actors, male and female, arrived, and then, a few seconds before 6, a platinum blonde with bright red lipstick, a tight sweater, and a long, slim skirt rushed in. I'd like to leave you with a few pieces of Ed Murrow. Ed Murrow, the class and caliber of reporter and presenter both the UK and the USA really need at the moment. A clip from Edward R Murrow's final reply to Senator Joseph McCarthy, See It Now appearance, April the 13th, 1954. Edward R Murrow's original introduction to This I Believe from the 1950s. A clip from Goodnight and Good Luck, 2005, directed by George Clooney, starring David Strathairn, Patricia Clarkson, Jeff Daniels, and Frank Langella. For more about these clips, see below. Thank you for sharing some time with me, and until next time, good night and good luck.
Last week, Senator McCarthy appeared on this program to correct any errors he might have thought we made in our report of March 9th. Since he made no reference to any statements of fact that we made, we must conclude that he found no errors of fact. He proved again that anyone who exposes him, anyone who does not share his hysterical disregard for decency and human dignity and the rights guaranteed by the Constitution, must be either a communist or a fellow traveler. I fully expected this treatment. The senator added this reporter's name to a long list of individuals and institutions he has accused of serving the communist cause. His proposition is very simple. Anyone who criticizes or opposes McCarthy's methods must be a communist. And if that be true, there are an awful lot of communists in this country. For the record, let's consider briefly some of the senator's charges. He claimed, but offered no proof, that I had been a member of the Industrial Workers of the World. That is false. I was never a member of the IWW, never applied for membership. Men that I worked with in the Pacific Northwest and Western Washington and logging camps will attest that I never had any affiliation or affinity with that organization. The senator charged that Professor Harold Lasky, a British scholar and politician, dedicated a book to me. That's true. He is dead. He was a socialist. I am not. He was one of those civilized individuals who did not insist upon agreement with his political principles as a precondition for conversation or friendship.
This I Believe. By that name, we bring you a new series of radio broadcasts presenting the personal philosophies of thoughtful men and women in all walks of life. In this brief time each night, a banker or a butcher, a painter or a social worker, people of all kinds who need have nothing more in common than integrity, a real honesty, will talk out loud about the rules they live by, the things they have found to be the basic values in their lives. We hardly need to be reminded that we are living in an age of confusion. A lot of us have traded in our beliefs for bitterness and cynicism, or for a heavy package of despair, or even a quivering portion of hysteria. Opinions can be picked up cheap in the marketplace, while such commodities as courage and fortitude and faith are in alarmingly short supply. Around us all, now high like a distant thunderhead, now close upon us with the wet, choking intimacy of a London fog, there is an enveloping cloud of fear. There is a physical fear, the kind that drives some of us to flee our homes and burrow into the ground in the bottom of a Montana valley, like prairie dogs, to try to escape, if only for a little while, the sound and the fury of the A-bombs or the hell bombs or whatever may be coming. There is a mental fear, which provokes others of us to see the images of witches in a neighbor's yard and stampedes us to burn down his house. And there is a creeping fear of doubt of what we have been taught, of the validity of so many things we had long since taken for granted to be durable and unchanging. It has become more difficult than ever to distinguish black from white, good from evil, right from wrong. What truths can a human being afford to furnish the cluttered, nervous room of his mind with when he has no real idea how long a lease he has on the future? It is to try to meet the challenge of such questions that we have prepared these broadcasts. It has been a difficult task and a delicate one. Except for those who think in terms of pious platitudes or dogma or narrow prejudice, and those thoughts we aren't interested in, people don't speak their beliefs easily or publicly. In a way, our project has been an invasion of privacy, like demanding a man to let a stranger read his mail. General Lucius Clay remarked, it would hardly be less embarrassing for an individual to be forced to disrobe in public than to unveil his private philosophy. Mrs. Roosevelt hesitated a long time. What can I possibly say that will be of any value to anybody else, she asked us. And a railway executive in Philadelphia argued at first that we might as well try to engrave the Lord's Prayer on the head of a pin as to attempt to discuss anything thoughtfully in the space of 5 minutes. Yet, these people and many more have all made distinctive contributions of their beliefs to this series. You will hear from that inspiring woman, Helen Keller, who, despite her blindness, has lived a far richer life than most of us. From author Pearl Buck, sculptor William Zorak, businessmen and labor leaders, teachers and students. Perhaps we should warn you that there is one thing you won't hear, and that is a pat answer for the problems of life. We don't pretend to make this time a spiritual or psychological patent medicine chest where one can come and get a pill of wisdom to be swallowed like an aspirin to banish the headaches of our time. This reporter's beliefs are in a state of flux. It would be easier to enumerate the items I do not believe in than the other way around. And yet, in talking to people, in listening to them, I have come to realize that I don't have a monopoly on the world's problems. Others have their share, often far, far bigger than mine. This has helped me to see my own problems in truer perspective. And in learning how others have faced their problems, this has given me fresh ideas about how to tackle mine. I hope, as you listen to future programs on This I Believe, that they may be of assistance to you in a similar way.